Good morning and welcome to this interactive debate on digitalisation in times of COVID, impacts on operations, business models and employees. I'm Brian Maguire. Our event today is supported by TUI, and you can follow the debate at #EADebates, and please tweet your comments and our social media team will respond to you this morning. To ask questions, go to the chat section and use the ask button. COVID-19 has hit businesses hard, interrupting their operations, inducing low consumer demand and causing additional costs. But many companies were still able to make use of these unique circumstances to accelerate their digital transformation. They created customer-oriented technological solutions that tackle COVID-19 challenges, such as reducing physical customer interactions. And these solutions will help make their businesses future-proof in the post-pandemic period. In addition to these practical short-term changes, companies are using changing consumer behaviour to transform their business models and enable new forms of cooperation. And while European tourism is currently experiencing the worst of the crisis, it is argued that digital transformation and the adoption of platform-based business models will define the shape of the sector's recovery. But how can we ensure success? And are there rules or guidelines or established best practices which can be deployed? And can digital transformation alone bring about new businesses, opportunities and growth? Our panel today, Josiane Cotillard, she is the MEP and member of the ITRE Committee of the European Parliament from Malta. And Diego Ciulli, he's the Senior Public Policy Manager at Google. Good morning to both of you. And Nick Hall, Founder and CEO of Digital Tourism Think Tank. And Federico Molle, a Policy Analyst at the EPC. And Frank Rosenberger, he's the CIO at the TUI Group. Good morning to all of you. Great to have you with us. 60 seconds for each of you to kick off with your elevator pitch. Josiane, let's start with you.
I'll do my best to also be very, very brief in this. So yes, the pandemic has shown us that tourism also digitalized very fast along with other sectors. And data from McKinsey has shown us that we have jumped forward 5 years in the first 8 weeks when it comes to digital implementation. We have an opportunity, I believe, also in tourism to build back better, to build back more sustainably, even by the use of digitalization, which is a very important tool here. Data will run the show, and we will have to ensure that all actors are involved, including SMEs, which could also have a lot of opportunities when it comes to monetizing their data. Otherwise, I wanted also to mention the important role that the regulator will play in the sector. We also hear a lot about self-regulation vis-a-vis regulation, even by the EU. We're speaking of the SA and DMA, and there are a lot of issues and discussions surrounding this. But for sure, there's an opportunity. We know that the platform economy and the sharing economy are very important when it comes to the current situation of tourism, but also the future, where it will continue to expand in this field. I also wanted to mention the importance that we'll recognize that digitalization blends the boundaries of different markets and sectors, therefore raising certain concerns when it comes to competition and consumer protection, something which is also being discussed at the EU level when it comes to the regulator. We have to ensure that what is illegal offline is illegal also online, and that's the challenge before us. But for sure, we also need to keep in mind the opportunities and the positive side which digitalization allows us. And this is very important in this regard. I wanted to close a bit on another point, which I'd like to put in for discussion also. We know that digitalization has been cutting down on certain jobs, but we also know that it is providing and will provide further new jobs in the sector. Skills are essential here, but I wanted to close with this question. The human component in tourism. I don't think that digitalization can overcome it totally, because, for example, are we ready to substitute the warmth of a receptionist in a hotel, or otherwise that loud cab driver who will share with you local news and also local attractions? I'll close here for now, and I look forward to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Diego Ciulli, over to you.
My 60 seconds just to agree with MEP Cotillard and spend some words on what Google can do and how we can contribute. I think we have a responsibility in supporting the industry recovering for the hard times of COVID, and also to upgrade and upscale the role of tourism and the innovativeness of the tourism industry. I think our first priority is to make sure that any company, including the smallest one, think about bars or restaurants, can benefit from the digital opportunities. So provide platforms to make sure they can engage with consumers and travelers. The second one was now mentioned by the MEP is skills. We have announced a pledge in June to train 10 million people in Europe and Northeast and Africa, Middle East and Africa in critical digital skills to support the economic recovery post-COVID. I think a lot of this could be from the tourism sector, because tourism is a work-intensive sector, but those workers will need the critical and basic digital skills to succeed in their jobs and to support the industry. Third aspect that Google can help with is data. We have recently announced that, and we can deep dive later on in this debate, new tools to provide SMEs and the tourism industry with data to better understand consumer behavior and to better forecast what will happen in the sector. Usually the tourism industry based its decision on historical data, but after COVID, historical data really are not a proxy anymore, because history has changed so quickly and so fast. So providing real-time data on the attention and the intentions of consumers and travelers is a tool that Google can provide to support the recovery of the industry. And last but not least, in my 60 seconds, people at home have looked for information about traveling. We have a responsibility to provide quality information online, and we have done a lot and plan to do more to help smaller destinations, less well-known destinations, be discovered by potential travelers, and to help diversify in the coming months and years the offer and the availability of potential tourist destinations.
Thank you so much. Nicole, your 60 seconds, elastic 60 seconds this morning to all of you. Nicole.
Thank you very much. Well, here at the Digital Tourism Think Tank, we've been working with digitalization for the last 10 years. But I have to say, what we've experienced in the last year is what everybody is referring to as forced digitalization. So those that held behind are now, having no choice but to catch up. And when we think about digitalization and smart tourism, there are two terms that define this progressive transformation of our industry. But really, the reality is they're much more complex than those words suggest. We have to understand what's actually happening and the level of maturity when it comes to digital throughout the sector. And I don't believe that we currently have anywhere near as much data on that as we should have. We need to develop a clear framework, a common set of indicators, and we need to be able to address things like mindset and exposure to trends, and not only skills, which I think is a really key point, by the way. Throughout the EU, there are many incredible mechanisms that can help SMEs in particular to get on board with digitalization. But it's really important that we are able to identify the right methods, understand the ambitions of businesses that aren't always there if it's a lifestyle business, and also tap into the opportunities. The reality is that this is an industry that's really dominated by micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. But we also need to support that interplay between those technology startups, the key commercial actors, and the small businesses, with a view to leveling up those businesses. And lastly, I think it's really important that we shift this thinking when it comes to digitalization that's dominated the last 10 years, from getting businesses online, which is still a really, really key point. I don't want to understate that, but also to tapping into the bigger opportunities. Also, with that, addressing the meta opportunities which exist in society today. We all know about many of those, obviously even new ones which have emerged as a result of COVID. But this is the opportunity, as we heard at the beginning, to build back better, to use digitalization to address some of those bigger issues, and to create greater resilience for our industry. The truth is that if we look 10 years forward, we're looking at continual disruption that we've already seen in the last 10 years. And businesses need to be much better equipped to be able to respond to those changes and to remain relevant and to be able to continue to adapt their businesses.
Thank you, Nick. Federico, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. I think that I'll keep my remarks focused on the financial aspects of the digital transformation, because while it's absolutely true that COVID has forced through digitalization for a number of businesses, not just in the tourism sector, but elsewhere, the other thing that we really have to remember is that COVID has absolutely battered their balance sheets. And being able to finance their digital transformations will become even more challenging going forward. Their cash reserves have been run down, they've had to take on additional debt. And even before COVID hit, financing digital investments was a major challenge for a lot of businesses because the intangible nature of those investments don't come with associated collateral, which means that banks underfinance them. And in Europe, we have a predominantly bank-based financial system, particularly for SMEs. And as a result, there was a real financing gap, and that will just be exacerbated going forward. So when we talk about the digital transformation after COVID and what policy can do to help, I think it's really critical to try and address this financial gap. And I think the European policy, even at the EU level, will have to direct a lot more resources to try and help businesses through finance guarantees or through other mechanisms, try and surmount this. Because there's going to be a dearth of investment following COVID. I think the European Investment Bank predicted something like an 831 billion shortfall over 2 years, and that will include digital investments. So as much as businesses may want to digitalize now that they've seen the benefits through COVID, to do so, they'll have to overcome these financing gaps, and policy will have to step in to help.
Thank you so much, Federico. Over to you, Frank Rosenberger.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks also for all the colleagues here on the plenum for making these comments. And I felt quite well prescribed in terms of being TUI really fully in the storm over the last 12 months regarding COVID. And the key question for us was, of course, when travel doesn't take place, what are we doing? We have a fantastic IT team, and should they also go on furlough, or are we using the time? And we have decided to continue actually to keep our IT folks fully on work, on duty, and to focus on building a future-proof technology stack for TUI. What does that mean? I think there's 3 key points. Even before COVID, we actually looked into how we can provide new ways of working at TUI. And that means, from my perspective, actually 4 things. Yeah? My time, my place, my colleagues, my data, so that people can work from wherever they want to work, and they are not actually tied to a workplace in an office. The second was that we changed our organization from a kind of a market vertical integrated technology team to work actually on the same topics in a domain-oriented organization in terms of bringing all the competence which we have in the company together in global teams. And of course, these new ways of working have helped a lot in terms of being able to transform into a domain-centric organization. And last but not least, we created a new program to set up these new digital travel platform, who should actually bring the elements you also discussed here together. Because on the one side, our 10,000s of partners, which we work into the different destinations, small, medium-sized companies, mom and dad shops, and they are hit most by this pandemic. And when we look at Southern European countries, they have a dependence on travel and tourism between 15 and 25% of their BIP. So what did we do here? And so we really started to completely rework our stack from working with partners. So therefore, what are we doing on the sourcing? How can we actually help to digitalize them? And that's for experiences as well as for hoteliers. as well as our airline partnerships. And the second element is in terms of how do we build products around that. And this should enable also our customer, the other part of the platform, to have much, much more choice than in the past with purely packaged. So therefore that we can definitely provide experiences in all destinations, that we can provide hotel-only transfers, flights, that we have a kind of an end-to-end travel platform for them, which we call trips. And this is something which is a big transformation for TUI, to move from 5 vertical integrated stacks for package into this much more open global platform. It's a multi-year program. So originally, when we pre-COVID, we thought about that. We thought it would maybe take 5, 6, 7 years. I think we are now down, and we take more risk, so that we can do that in 2, 3 years. And we have just been able to start and to launch the first components a few weeks ago in the first markets. So therefore, for us, it's really to work on the digital transformation in 4 dimensions. It's, of course, about technology. It's about our company, about our organization. It's about culture, and it's about our partners and customers.
Thank you so much, Frank. Thank you to all of our panelists. It's a really great, broad perspective that we can drill down into some of the detail of this now. I would like to come away from this discussion with a sense of, for our audience to understand, of what's practical, what needs to be done, and with a sense of optimism that we really can build back better at the end of this crisis as well. Josiane, I want to pick up on something which Federico was saying as well about funding. In Malta, for example, the SMEs, the mom and pop businesses, it's extremely difficult to find the cash to do anything new. Just to survive, if people have survived to this point, is near miraculous. How do we expect businesses to build back better at this point? What kind of support is there for them to do so?
Yes, first of all, yes, support is indeed needed, because we can speak about policies, we can speak about the twin transition, but if we don't support our SMEs and our micro businesses, yes, our mom and dad shops there, which are literally family-run businesses, which we have a lot of in Malta and Gozo. Otherwise, it could be difficult, especially also with the effects of the pandemic, which has hit hard, very hard indeed. In Malta, the positive initiatives were launched by the government from national funds when it comes to supporting our SMEs, even when it comes, for example, to supporting an SME to incentivize telework, or if an SME wanted to invest in telework facilities when it didn't have them before, it got also some schemes which it could tap into. And I wanted to share one practical example of how a local authority, which is called Jobs Plus, incentivized also and got through the message of current schemes, which were also funded under the last programming period. They have some schemes which relate to training of employees and also integrating employees which are disadvantaged into the labor market. They also use the platforms of accountants which have a close link with their clients, with their SMEs, to also market these schemes. So what I am saying here, the schemes are there. On a national level, they are there even on an EU level, and we have to look at the flagships which are also afforded under the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which SMEs also in the tourism sector could tap into.
Okay, do you think that these schemes, these systems are too complex for the average business to be able to deal with? It's fine if you are a government agent, you're well trained in this, you have day and night to learn your policy documents and look through the 25 portals before you get your application submitted as well. But if you're running a bar in Malta, or a restaurant in Malta, a small hotel, how on earth are you going to wade through this process, Josiane?
For sure, there is more to do when it comes to cutting down on bureaucracy, not even in our member states, but also at an EU level. And yes, we need to support our SMEs and facilitate as much as possible.
Okay.
And indeed, in the SME strategy report of the European Parliament, we did speak about the importance of having local assistance to our SMEs. We have to look at one-stop shops. We have to look at professionals who will assist our SMEs to get to know the opportunities of the twin transition and what schemes are there even at EU level, because there is a myriad of opportunities that our SMEs need our help.
Thank you. Let me go to Diego. Diego, you speak about the Google Skills Pledge as well. What does that mean for small businesses? What do you help businesses do, which is really critical at this moment?
Well, we are offering a wide range of free digital skills courses and opportunities. From the most basic one, I know it's weird, but there are still SMEs that do not know how to take ownership of their page on Google. If you search for a specific SME on Google, on the right angle, you will see a panel, a knowledge panel that can be owned by the small businesses to provide direct information to Google users, like their opening times, or if food to take away is available, or other relevant information. Many SMEs still don't use that, so making available and help them using that free tools is the most basic digital skill that we can provide. On the other side, we are providing free trainings on the basics of machine learning or the basics of cloud computing. Different SMEs have different necessities around skills. We are trying to design programs that can be beneficial to the less tech-savvy ones, that is the widest number, and even to the most tech-savvy, to help them upskill their personnel and launch new challenges.
Thank you. Frank, you're dealing with a company at the other side of the scale here in tourism as well. You have a different culture, different mentality towards innovation, and you have the cash flow to do it, I presume. So your approach is different, but your lessons learned during this crisis, how can you translate those into the wider European context in terms of what needs to be done now if we're to build back better?
Yeah, I think the first element is, of course, we can help destinations a lot. And that was what we always saw. When destinations are opening, we can provide them with customers. Yeah, and so when in the summer Mallorca opened, our hotels, which worked with us, we could really help them to fill fairly quickly to 70-80%. Even in those days, the partners we are working with, for example, in the Canaries, they are well occupied. So therefore, I think one element is in terms of saying, well, we provide you with the kind of the digitalization skills. We can actually, due to our airline fleet, fairly quickly bring significant transport capacities to these to the islands, to the cities, and to the destination. I think that is something our platforms can handle fairly quickly. What is, of course, necessary is because these kind of setup costs are significant in terms of starting operations into a market and then also closing. So therefore, I think one element is a kind of the mid to long-term perspective. I think the more stable that is, the more trusted is it by the consumer, and also from a kind of a cash point, the more effective is that. There is another point I want to mention here, and that goes back also to Hosan, to your point around making funds available for these small and medium-sized companies. In the past, we had been always very strong in terms of helping to finance smaller companies through the winter. That's, of course, in the pandemic, when you're yourself hit by significant liquidity challenges, a much bigger problem. Yeah, and I think that's something providing also significant liquidity to the partner so that they can sustain the COVID, providing a kind of a perspective which actually then allows us to fully materialize the impact and the potential of our TRIPS platform in terms of providing them with guests and great experiences.
Okay, thank you. Federico, it's one thing to say we can help you with the money, but when the customers aren't there right now and people are essentially furloughed, is it just a case of getting the customers back and everything returns to normal, or is there going to be a structural problem in terms of being able to service those customers because people they're either bankrupt or they just can't find a way forward because there's no cash flow to prepare for customers? What's the funding mechanism to get SMEs back into business now?
So there are two things here. One is just how to make SMEs and businesses in general survive through the next year as we slowly start to return, and that's a more general question of economic and financial support. There's a number of mechanisms that the member states and the European Union can use to facilitate that transition as the supports are slowly, hopefully slowly taken away. There's the general macroeconomic environment and support from the ECB and the member states. There's various bankruptcy, insolvency, protection mechanisms that are currently in place that will allow businesses to slowly get back on their feet. But when we come to the digital transition aspect specifically, then I think that there will have to be specific mechanisms to help address the financing gap, because the financing gap will remain. It was there long before COVID-19 struck. It will remain afterwards, and it will be exacerbated by the fact that balance sheets will be in a much more precarious position than they were before the pandemic. And I think that there's really a question as to whether the various support mechanisms that exist at an EU and member state level for helping SMEs are really optimized to help the digital transition. If you look at the data in how European structural and investment funds are spent, a surprisingly small amount is spent on digital priorities. I think in the data that the Commission has published on this, there's like 6% of the funds spent on digital, and within that, only about 10% are spent on the digital transition for SMEs specifically. That's in contrast to rather much more substantial amounts that are spent on general SME support. And I think that there's really an open question as to whether these funds are being targeted in the best way to help this transition, because to a large extent, the SME competitiveness problem is a digital adoption problem. Compared to their peers in the US, SMEs and even larger companies are far behind when it comes to adopting digital technologies.
Let me ask Diego this, and bring Nick in on this as well. Diego, if we're going to go for a data-driven recovery, and in very practical terms, what you already described about getting bar owners, restaurant owners onto Google, so people simply know that they're open and what the service possibility is as well. If we're talking about data-driven recovery, what does that mean in terms of deployment and integration of the European market? What Federico has just outlined is we have a massive skills gap here. We have a slow uptake as well, and if we don't get this correction quickly, we end up with zombie businesses that can't deliver what customers want.
Well, that was what I was trying to say. It's information is widely available in the single market. The internet has been one of the tools that have made Europe much more a single market. But of course, the fact that technology is there doesn't mean that any company uses technology at its full potential. And we have a responsibility to make sure not just to develop technology, but also to make sure companies can use it. We can do it in two ways: free tools, and the other ways is making data available. We have just recently, specifically on the travel sector, announced two new platforms and tools, one for hotels, one for destinations, that provide insights based on Google search data on which users are, and potential travelers are interested in which region. So, for example, to discover that Germans are looking for travels in Malta, or if you are an hotel owner, to look where your potential customers come from. So data are increasingly available. We are fully committed to make more information and data available to SMEs and local companies, and to provide them with the tools to take advantage of them. The main gap, I agree, is the skills gap, because of course making technology available is important, but if people don't use it, it's quite useless.
Okay, Nick, data-driven recovery and the skills gap, how do we close the gap and how do we accelerate the recovery with data?
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, we need to understand the level of digital maturity that we have across the sector, and what we will definitely learn from that exercise is understanding that there's such a disparity between those small and micro SMEs that are maybe not even as we have, not even getting themselves listed with Google My Business. It's the absolute starting point to being found online, to having mobile optimized websites, to working on optimization, efficiency, and performance. But then there's the other end of the scale, which is innovation, which is the field that TUI is obviously really investing and playing in. And the whole spectrum is really important. And there are SMEs that play at both ends of that scale. And there's also the opportunity to connect different types of businesses, technology and non-technology businesses, together with other players in the industry. But I think what we're really missing right now is the expertise to deliver that, to motivate, to incentivize that. So going right back to your very first question, which was about, are the programs that exist today set up in a way that means they're really accessible for SMEs? I think it's a difficult one to answer, but in some ways, yes, but in other ways, the delivery and the distribution of that support is not always as accessible as it could be for SMEs. It's not always translated in a way that SMEs can really get the most out of it, to really find the ways to support that kind of shift in mindset that is often the key thing that's missing, to find that motivation and to get that exposure to trends. Because, as we know, and I think what we've heard from Diego is very clear, there are a lot of great programs that are already out there. But sometimes it's getting the support and convincing and persuading businesses as to why they should invest that time.
Frank, before the crisis came, you weren't waiting for this to happen. You were already moving toward digital transformation in a very substantial way. It's accelerated now, clearly. Your data-driven decision-making, what does that mean to you and your team? And has that changed because of the crisis?
Yeah, I think, we are in a super volatile market these days, and to play in that volatility, you need to have all that data. And as Diego mentioned, I think historic data has less value when what happens actually tomorrow is more based on political decisions on how the crisis is actually evolving. So therefore, this is something very difficult to predict. But what we can predict is actually in terms of how would actually these kind of policy changes, how will they actually impact travel? How would they impact destinations? And in terms of doing so, from a kind of a more technical perspective, we really had on the one side in our transformation to separate the kind of the data from the application. So historically, data was always part of the application. And by separating that and making that available for analytics, I think that is a tremendous step. And of course, on the one side, this incurs also a lot of political and considerations, because who owns the data? Yeah, and we have suppliers where we had discussion in terms of where they said, oh, it's our data. But at the end of the day, it was, of course, data created from customers, from partners in destinations. And the same is, of course, we could say, well, how open, how accessible is the data actually Google has? And I know here, Diego, we had a lot of ups and downs actually between our companies in terms of use of data. So therefore, I think access to data, how to make it available in a broad sense and also across markets is really key. And the same is also true for our kind of small shops, which we mentioned in the destination. I think for them it's quite relevant to understand, will next week to Malta come a wave of 20, 50,000 customers, tourism people, holiday makers, who actually want to consume something, or is the island in lockdown? I think that's a big difference when you work in tourism. I think that's something where we are really engaged from a kind of an end-to-end perspective, as to with local municipalities, with local governors, in terms of having the transparency on our programs, on how many flights do we have, how many customers they can actually expect in an opening scenario, and how also to prepare the destination.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions coming in now as well, and please, to our audience, send in as many as you can as soon as possible so we can try and get through them on time for you. Diego, maybe we'll take this one. Mohammed Gufran, he asks, can the provision of free digitalization tools instead of funding digitalization be an efficient policy measure? Diego.
Well, I think that our job is to make sure as much as possible free or low-cost tools are available. Of course, it doesn't substitute the public policy initiative of funding it. I think it's up to the governments and institutions to decide whether digitization is a key driver for growth, and if it's worth investing for a policy-driven, for a public funding-driven policy. I think that to stay on the same side, supporting, providing tools and providing data, that is something that the industry does quite well. Providing skills, there is an area in which public institutions and the industry can work together. And then industrial policies, I would call it, to support digitization, that it's quite a key in the current conversation about the next generation EU, but probably I'm not the best person to answer on this part.
Thank you. Josiane, another question, I'm just going to rephrase this slightly, so from Adrian. He asks, how could we increase the trust in services for digitalization offered by companies like Google or Microsoft? I would ask you, does that really matter in this crisis? Or is trust really an issue? And in terms of the European Parliament, you've dealt with lots of privacy issues, how data is collected. Does that really matter for this recovery? Is this an agenda issue for you?
For me, trust is essential in any given service. And if we want to build back better indeed, it's important also to look at enhancing trust issues, enhancing also the consumer's trust in the service they receive, and also for the consumer also to take the full potential. So we're speaking just right now on data. There could be issues where data sharing is involved, and also the data strategy of the EU is looking at circumstances where data is a public good. In those circumstances, it could be shared also with all involved actors. And therefore, yes, consumers need to trust, consumers need to know how their data is being used, and there could be cases where they could need access to that data. Yes, so I believe that building back better means also enhancing trust, and to enhance trust both by consumers but also by SMEs and all relevant actors, we need legal clarity. That is why also the EU is setting down on working on diverse policies, whether it's the DSA, the DMA, to ensure that even if there are dominant market positions, we ensure that negative effects are controlled there.
Okay, thank you. I just want to ask you about something you mentioned in a previous conversation, was You have a system in Malta where accountancy firms help SMEs get funding of all sorts for European Union. This seems like a sensible approach to me. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So yes, it's good that you gave me the opportunity to explain it better, because I'm not sure that the points came across well. So what I was saying is that on a regional level, every member state and every region should look at solutions of how to bring governmental and EU schemes closer to the citizens. I was mentioning a practice from a local authority in Malta, where apart from marketing schemes online for SMEs to get to know about them, they also did an informal task of speaking to accountants. Accountants have a relationship with SMEs, obviously, because every SME needs an accountant for its financial sector, to inform them and tell them, look, there are these schemes available. It would be helpful a lot if, while speaking to your clients, while speaking to the SMEs, the micro businesses, you could inform them of these schemes they could benefit from. So yes, all of us, us as MEPs, the local authorities, everyone involved in this field should give a helping hand. Sometimes we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We just
really working to get these schemes out to all the SMEs and make sure that they're delivered in a way that's both interesting and really accessible for those businesses. The truth is that you often have to convince or persuade a business why they should invest and take the time to work on those development aspects that are really important for them. So, you know, there's the need on the one hand to persuade them that this is worth their investment of time. But on the other hand, there's the need to make sure that those schemes and those support mechanisms really make sense for them, that they're designed in the right way for those SMEs to feel the maximum output that they can get from it. And I think that's not always the case when we look at the different programs which exist. There's some brilliant examples, but there's also some that perhaps could be better.
Thank you. Frank, you didn't step back from investing when the crisis came. You really stepped up at this moment as well. You invested during the crisis. You continued with a straight line through this. And to say, well, you're a big company, of course you could. That isn't the case. And one of your biggest competitors, Thomas Cook, doesn't exist anymore because they had lots of different issues, but they weren't taking this long-term strategy approach, which you seem to have done at TUI. What does it mean to you to invest in a crisis? What wider lessons are there for Europe in this?
Yeah, I think the key point is, of course, to really think about the customer and the consumer and to understand how customer demand is changing. And to then choose the kind of investments in terms of improving the offer towards a customer. And digitalization, of course, I think that was in kind of an incoming statement which we had here. It's not just to say we are about a website. It's about bringing the value chain together. And when we think about our partners, so for example, our hotels, how actually to translate their offerings towards the end customer, because when a customer books, typically it's holidays. Yeah, it's traditionally a couple of months before he goes on departure. So therefore, I think we can actually provide via our platform the partner and the customer with the opportunities at the hotel. For example, if he wants to take sports courses, if he wants to have wellness, if he wants to do any kind of other activities which are provided by experiences providers, mom and dad shops around the hotel or in the destinations. And that's something we can transport directly to the end consumer, to the holiday maker. And data, of course, helps a lot to actually choose from the vast variety, from restaurant dining over windsurfing, over hiking, to choose what is actually the right experience and to provide the customer with these kind of choices whilst he is preparing himself for travel. I think that's something where I truly believe we are focusing our investments on, in terms of bringing that value chain together, helping delivering the platform, helping the partners on the one side as the consumer, and we focus the investments on those elements. This is a kind of for the top, and this is preparing after the crisis. The second is, of course, digitalization of, I would say, not smart work. Yeah, we had this kind of term here from Nick, where he said about smart tourism. Yeah, I think we have some elements of maybe non-smart tourism. I think before the crisis, 60% of the times in our call centers were cloaked up with asks for pickup times. Yeah, so therefore we actually thought, well, it's a kind of a big element, obviously, for customers to not miss their transfer to the hotel or back to the experience or to the plane. So therefore, to provide that in a fully digital way, in a kind of an Uber style, so that you precisely know, okay, my pickup is at 10:35 and the bus or the driver is still 3 miles away, and I can see on the map how he's arriving. So this is elements where we help our partners to digitalize on the one side and provide a much, much better customer service on the other side, and also enable our people in the call center to spend their time on more value-creating activities.
Thank you. Diego, investing in a crisis doesn't necessarily mean putting the money into it. So but you're providing lots of resources. Businesses that can invest in time, if they don't have the customers at the moment, they can invest in time. How do you convince people to do this? How do you convince people to be active now and not wait for a recovery?
Well, on this part, we deeply believe in the partnership with civil society and public institutions. We have recently launched in Africa, and we are planning to do something also in Europe, a partnership with the United Nations World Travel Organization on a Google United Nations Travel Accelerator. That's intensive trainings and events for the tourism industry. We have done locally, I think about Greece, Spain, Italy, partnership with local trade bodies, so with organizations representing SMEs to deliver this message. Because, we are fairly aware that this is the right time to upskill the workforce, to learn new things, to study consumer behaviors. But of course, in challenging times, SME owners tend to focus on the immediate. So we need support from their representation, from bodies working day by day with them. I think about the chambers of commerce or trade organization to deliver the message and work with them hand in hand to discover the new normality of the travel industry.
Okay, thank you. Nick, I want to respond to Frank. I want to bring Josiane in to talk about what Diego just mentioned about upskilling and the skills agenda. Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, investment is so important. This word innovation, sounds like such a buzzword, but it's so important. And we've just gone through a year of almost inactivity for most SMEs. And how many of those SMEs have actually taken that time to invest in learning new skills, in that digitalization process, and in addressing those core issues or opportunities which exist in their business? When we talk about delivering public funds to support SMEs, and we talk about the kind of cash problem that's going to exist in the coming years, we need to think about how we can deliver that financial support, but with those conditions that businesses take that opportunity to make that investment in growing and developing the business, addressing certain aspects around innovation and being able to apply that. I think, what we know is in tourism, there are some other issues aside from the pandemic related to sustainability and things like seasonality, which are really key. And as such a seasonal industry, we've got these continual moments of downtime where we should be investing in growing and changing and adapting business. So looking at customer concerns and customer needs. As an SME ourselves, we doubled up our investment when we actually lost all the business in March. And it's paid off for us. We've actually grown and we've really, really succeeded through this. And I think it's a lesson to take to all SMEs, that if you can find the mechanism and the way to actually invest in what you're doing, then in the long run, you'll be a much more resilient business. And that's got to be the message that people take away from this.
Thank you. Justine, the skills agenda, upskilling, reskilling, what does that mean for digitalization and the recovery?
Yes, upskilling and reskilling are indeed very important, and I link in to the term resilience. If we really need our SMEs, our businesses, our tourism sector and other sectors to be really resilient, we really need to invest in skills. And the Pact for Skills also, which has been presented by the European Commission, is indeed very important here. We need to look at the importance that when we speak of skills, it's not just basic IT, because there are situations at the workplace where basic IT is important, but there are other situations that if we really want to be at the forefront of digitalization, we have to look at modern technologies, at AI, at big data, and skills in that sector. We know that there is the knowledge gap, and we really need to set down on targets, like the targets we have in the environmental field when it comes to the Green Deal. We need to have targets also in the digital sphere, something which is upcoming also by the Commission and which we really need. Otherwise, I wanted to add a few points from previous speakers. Also, when it comes to smart tourism, I believe that apart from consumer behavior and consumer needs and being fastly adapting to them, we need to look also at the aspect of sustainability. So how will digitalization in the tourism field address crowd management? Because if we want to build back better, we need to also look at regulating aspects where there is over-tourism, for example, and how digitalization could help to prevent that. I bring the example also of how apps could bring tourists to more remote areas, to those small villages in a country which I personally enjoy a lot to visit whilst I'm traveling, and which sometimes are not marketed. And therefore, I believe that yes, digitalization could help us in the sustainable aspect of tourism, about having smart mobility and smart tourism to build back better in that field.
Thank you. Frank, sustainability, you've clearly a corporate policy in this as well. What does that mean in practical terms, though, for you dealing with your partners as well?
Yeah, I think we have a broad agenda on sustainability, as you could expect from a multinational company, and I think it starts on the airlines, where we have the most efficient or the most efficient fleet in the world, in terms of emissions per flown customer kilometer. And I think also with our new investments into new planes, we are going into the most efficient ones. But I think on the other end of the spectrum, when you go in the destination, I think we really support with our foundation local initiatives, and that typically starts with children and women, in terms of helping them, enabling them to get a kind of access to a proper education. And that's really at the kind of the heart of what we hear here regarding reskilling, upskilling, to really provide the skills, to provide the literacy, the understanding of how things are coming together. And when we compare countries with managed and supported tourism, tourism can have a great impact on the society, can improve the equalness of countries, and also grow. So therefore, I am absolutely convinced that we have a kind of a double down during the crisis in many destinations, because on the one side, their biggest industry, so to speak, or a source of income is actually tourism. So therefore, when nobody can travel, that's falling apart. And the second point is then you have unemployment and stuff like that. So what you do in terms of skills, what we can provide, I think that's a kind of a key element, and which needs to be addressed.
Thank you. I want to bring Josiane in just a second. First, Federico, on sustainability as well. How do you see sustainability and the green agenda and the digitalization of the recovery blend together?
Well, I think the two are really complementary. I think some of my colleagues at EPC have for many years been working on how the digital agenda and the green agenda can work together, and how digitalization can really enhance the greening of the economy. But fundamentally, I think it all comes back to this question of investment and the availability of investment. I'm going to sound like a bit of a stuck record here, but whether it's the digital transition or the green transition, what you need businesses to make the investments to make those transitions happen. Their balance sheets have been battered by COVID, and public support really needs to step in to enable them to make those investments, because it's private businesses that need to make these investments. Public investment in and of itself is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So the various support mechanisms from the EU, whether it's the Resilience and Recovery Facility, whether it's cohesion funding, whether it's even Horizon, need to be geared to enabling private investment. Nick made a very good point about how mindsets have changed during the pandemic, and I think that's really critical, because now that the mindset has changed, they can take advantage of the various opportunities there are for these transitions, but only if the support to enable their private investment is there by the member states and by the European Commission and various bodies like the EIB and so forth.
Thank you. Josiane, digital nomads, what does that mean to you?
Yes. I wanted to bring up this important point. So at the moment, we already have digital nomads and tourism related to the digital field. And therefore, I think that whilst financing is very important, and I do agree that there needs to be strong financing initiatives which convince SMEs that there will be a real return on investment, also it's important to look at trends and new trends or existing trends which we could develop better. So we have already the digital nomads with us who for example, travel to a particular country or an area, a region which provides facilities, technological facilities, but also an ambience where they can also meet up with peers in their area of work. And here, this brings me to another point. COVID has brought digitalization, flexi work, and telework and remote work with it. Whilst we have to make sure that workers' rights are still respected within this environment, we also should look at the benefits of this new setup. So, for example, if I've been given flexi work, I could, in all honesty, go and work anywhere. So if a person could work from remotely for a month, that person could also travel. And that would mean that there could be new trends of traveling, if incentivized, new trends of traveling beyond the normal seasonality of tourism. And I think this is also important to keep in mind. Whilst it is a difficult period, we need to be innovative. We need to look at existing good opportunities and develop them further in other aspects.
Fantastically. Frank, what do you think of digital nomads?
Concept, yeah, and I'm really a big fan of it, yeah. And this was one of the key elements when we created that new work at TUI, to say everyone should work from wherever he wants to work. Of course, that's not possible for, I would say, as a receptionist or when you give trainings for swimming and stuff like that. But for our teams and IT development, it doesn't matter. And I think that's something which we have trained today, where we have brought people together from the UK, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Poland, which are TUI employees, and they are now working together in these kind of global teams. But at the end, you're absolutely right. It wouldn't matter if they would sit in Malta, in Crete, or in Fuerteventura.
Thank you. Diego, I want to speak a bit about leadership here and just say to our audience, you have about 10 minutes to send in your questions, so please do that now. I'll try and put them to our panel. Diego, change often requires big brand leadership. People have got to look at brands they know, they trust, and observe the patterns that are there as well. In terms of digitalization, for your company, this should be a soft sell. People shouldn't have any complexity about the idea that what's on offer. But more broadly, what does leadership, big brand leadership, what's it required to do? What can it do for the digitalization and for the recovery?
Well, I think leadership is super important for any company and is strictly related for what was covered before about trust. Digital leadership and the ability to offer digital services has a lot to do with trust in the company that provides them. I think that any company should try to build that kind of leadership in true trust and transparency. So in the ability to reassure users that data the users share are used only to provide that kind of services, are not shared with third parties, and are not used beyond what is required. So yeah, quickly and in a nutshell, I would really link the notion of leadership with the notion of trust in this area.
Frank, big brand leadership, what does that mean to you? What can you transfer to the wider market?
Yeah, I think for our customers, they can trust when they do holidays with TUI that these holidays are safe, even in the kind regardless if we look at our hygiene concepts, if we look at testing, we have always been, it's been enormously high on our agenda to provide actually secure travel for our customers. I think that's part of our brand's DNA. It is TUI, trusted, unique, inspiring. So it's the most precious time of the year. And we're there to help the customers to make the most out of it. And I think that's a part of our DNA.
Nick, does the same apply to the European brand? Is there brand leadership for digitalization for not just tourism, but for the global recovery? Does Europe have a leadership role to play here in digitalization?
Yeah, I think leadership is something we talk about almost every day. And, defining leadership requires us to think about it differently. You've got this traditional notion of leadership at a supranational level, advocacy, but leadership also exists. We call it leadership with a small L. Leadership should exist in everybody, in every organization, and we should really find ways to empower people to rise up. We often talk in digitalization about kind of flattening hierarchy, and I think that's really core to being able to enable everyone to find their own potential and to be able to tap into that and to be able to set out a vision and realize it. So for us, leadership means maybe something a little bit different to what we're discussing here, but I think it's really key to building back a more resilient, more sustainable industry that's driven by innovation, data, and technology.
Diego, how do tech companies help achieve this leadership? You clearly there's greater visibility for those who are inspired. If they want to understand what's happening in their market, the data is there to do it. How do they translate that into tangible action today for the recovery?
The first one is data and the insights. We are trying to. It's always challenging to find the balance on which data make widely available and how to preserve privacy. We had found a way, and all the data I was presenting before are completely privacy free because they don't have to do with any personal data. We share, for example, what people tend to search online, what they are interested in terms of destination or information. There is a rising interest on when people will be able to travel again, for example. And during the COVID-19 crisis, we have done a big work to share mobility data and to make available people mobility data to help health authorities to plan restrictions and better understand if the restrictions are paying off. So the first thing that I would say and reiterate is that there is not a conflict among sharing publicly big data to take the public decisions, and on the other side preserve users' privacy. And this is in a sense the core of the notion of leadership to trust. And then the other support that we can provide to data-driven leadership is, again, provide with information. So skills also at the higher levels, and guide with the example.
Thank you. Frank, when we're talking about innovation, do you prefer centralization of tech systems, or do you prefer this just an ecosystem which allows greater innovation? Which works best at this moment when we're talking about digital recovery?
Yeah, we came from a world where we had very, very tight, integrated central systems. And I am a big fan of a much more open innovation culture, which actually means that our new platform TRIPS evolves into a kind of a software as a service world, which is based on microservices, which is an open architecture with many different partners. And I think that's I think for us, it's sometimes you say it's a quantum leap. So it's a big step from being closed to a kind of open to platform, and to allow yourself to work with 10,000s of different partners on a kind of an individual basis. And I think that's, of course, for them who are data literal, but we also need to provide solutions for other partners where their competency is just the heart, the ability actually to welcome people, to serve them, to provide some great experiences, and so that we care for the rest.
Thank you. We're going to wrap up in just a moment, so I'll ask you for your final remarks. But before we do, Josiane, just to follow what Frank said, if we look at Europe, and we spoke about this slightly earlier as well, the diverse opportunities for funding, for support that exist, does Europe need to have a centralized approach, a much more centralized approach to our digitalization and support platforms? Or are we okay with a widespread ecosystem, which frankly is too complex for SMEs?
Having a widespread ecosystem on itself is not an issue. It's a question of how we bring together these opportunities and how to address the knowledge gap that there exists among our SMEs, for example. So we need, for example, when it comes to also the important aspect of R&D, which maybe we should mention a bit, there needs to be network hubs bringing together different partners, whether they're SMEs, whether they're platforms, whether they're big businesses together, and getting to know of the opportunities and to address them. So in my opinion, I believe that what's important is that all the different examples of opportunities and funding incentives that exist need to be brought together in hubs, in one-stop shops, at one direct point where that SMEs, where that business, where that micro-enterprise could turn upon, check, and also not only when it comes to information, but also a hub which also gives assistance in applying for those funds and addressing queries, whether that would be worth it, for example, at first instance. I believe that these coordinations are important. The EU is intending to also put forward some practical examples. Recently, for example, the DigiGrow has also mentioned in a tourism task force meeting, which we had, that it will launch an online guide to EU funding in tourism when it comes to opportunities. So yes, I believe that it's complex. If we manage to bring together, for example, a budget line specifically on tourism, as I and other tourism task force members have been asking for, it will facilitate, but whilst we don't have the specific budget line, we have to look also at how to bring together those opportunities in hubs which address through professionals the queries of SMEs and help them to effectively benefit of the opportunities that exist.
Thank you. We have literally 5 minutes left. I'm not going to risk offering you all 60 seconds at this point. So 30 seconds for your final remarks. 30-second wrap up. Let's start with you, Nick.
Yeah, I think there's a fundamental realignment of the values and the mechanisms that drive tourism forward. And I think, as we just heard, this concept of hubs is really fundamental and crucial when we consider the changing role of what we call DMOs, destination marketing organizations, that are now completely redefining what it is to support their industry. So I think from the public sector, we need to reconsider how we can deliver that support and how we're structured and how we actually enable the businesses to make that transformation process.
Thank you. Federico.
Thanks. I think what this conversation really brings out is that there are a lot of existing technologies and opportunities that just aren't being made use of by a lot of existing businesses. And I think the public policy really needs to be geared towards getting this long tail of slow adopters to make use of what's out there, whether that's through financing guarantees or information sharing, hubs, etc. I think that should really be one of the key points of European policy going forward for the recovery.
Thank you. Diego, last remarks.
Last remark is that data support the idea that people want to be back to travel as soon as it will be safe, but traveling will be dramatically different from what it used to be, and consumer behavior will be different. So the key goal here is to support the transition, not to hinder innovation, and to make sure that as soon as we will be able to travel safely again, the tourism industry will be ready to catch the opportunity.
Super. Josiane, your last remarks.
If we want to be at the forefront as a European to build back better and also be digital leaders, even when it comes to the touristic sector, we need to look at key principles. For example, addressing the knowledge gap, addressing also the information and skills gap that we mentioned, and the new Pact for Skills is very important here. And then we have to look also at standards. The EU needs to lead by standards in digitalization. It needs to be flexible, but it also has to regulate where it matters and where it's for the benefit of society. We need to build back better in a sustainable and resilient manner, and we need to foster trust among all the stakeholders, whether it's the big business, the SME, or the consumer or the citizen, because in this way, with trust, resilience, sustainability, we surely can be at the forefront and also take a learning experience from COVID and become much more resilient for future shocks which may hit us. Therefore, I will close here. Let's be positive. Let's look at the positive side of digitalization. Let's regulate where necessary, but also let's look forward to further potential.
Great summary. Thank you. And last word to Frank.
Yeah, thanks a lot for all comment on that. I think also from our data, it's pretty clear consumers want to come back to travel. And I and the team here at TUI is absolutely convinced that TUI is an essential part of our European, of our kind of global culture. And it helps actually that people understand each other better and are also then, because of better understanding, also able to solve the other big problems which we have in front of us. So therefore, let's use the data in terms of making travel safe and resilient, also for any other future kind of crisis. And I think that would be my kind of player to all policymakers in Europe. I think it's so fantastic to have one currency, to have a kind of the idea of an open market. So let's make that real and help to have a better resilience by using also data in political decision-making in terms of dealing with a crisis with the best security for our people in Europe and as the world.
Thank you very much, Frank. Thanks to all our panelists for excellent contributions and very varied perspectives today as well. I think it's clear that Europe has the structure, the capacity, and definitely the ambition to go forward and to build back better. So thank you. And also to our audience as well for your attention today. We appreciate the time you've taken to be with us. You can continue to comment using the hashtag EA debates. And also thanks to our production team here today, to Malta, to Evie, Simona and Tamara. We wouldn't be here without them. And to TUI also for their support. We appreciate that. Thank you. I'm Brian Maguire, wishing you a good day.